Check 1, 2.
Testing, testing.
Good evening to my fellow board members, to the superintendent, to our in-person presenters, and to our virtual audience. This special call meeting, can I get a motion to call the meeting to take roll call? Sorry. Jeff?
Pardon me, Ms. Sonia,
Present.
Ms. Cousins is online, Ms. Fowler is online, Ms. Val is online, Mr. Davis,
Present.
Ms. Jones,
Here.
Dr. Roberts,
Present.
we have a quorum.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I do apologize for the delay. We could not begin this session until we had a quorum present. And with that occurring, I'd like to turn the floor over to our guest presenters. Please introduce yourselves.
Good evening. I'll untangle myself here. And first I want to thank Dr. Adams, Dr. Roberts, and the board for having us here tonight to share. My name is Sharita Love. I'm the Executive Director of the Education Equity Center of St. Louis. And here to co-present with me is David Dwight, who is the lead strategist and executive director with Ford through Ferguson. And so we want to start tonight. I'll lead into our conversations tonight and sharing about Better Futures, sharing this update with you, the board, and of course, inviting questions for clarity and a conversation around where we've been thus far. So I'll start us off. David will jump in midpoint, and then I'll jump back in to complete this presentation. And so starting just with the process of what we hope to share this evening, we want to share the origin story and purpose of Better Futures. We want to introduce the 12-month design process, clarify the design team leadership and partners, and then propose a partnership over the 12 months to produce a citywide plan. And again, of course, invite conversation, questions, and anything you'd like to share related to our conversation tonight. And so I'll spend the next few moments talking through how we got here, sharing the origin story, really prompting the fact that Better Futures and the ways that we've gotten here was sparked by the recent round of St. Louis Public School closures and consolidation, and the call to action from St. Louis Public School leadership, Dr. Adams and the board, to think about ways that we include community voice. I know that even ahead of some of the convenings that we've hosted, when closures were announced last summer, there were tons of community members who expressed concern, wanted to have their voices heard, and almost immediately, Dr. Adams and the board set out to say, how do we set the stage for those conversations to happen? And so a number of those sessions were hosted to listen, to share, to hear from community, and make space to really gather the feedback that was gathered over those many sessions, and think about ways that we can move towards some action on, what this could mean for supporting some type of citywide process that is really grounded in shared community ways of approaching how we think about schools and education in St. Louis City. And so that next phase for Dr. Adams was to reach out and convene those members of the community who expressed concern, who wanted to have their voice heard. And so Dr. Adams made that call, set the stage, set the table for these convenings to happen. And so we hosted, hold on, let me not get ahead of myself here. And so in response to those calls, 2 convenings were facilitated and held. They were facilitated by SCIP, by myself with the Education Equity Center of St. Louis, members of the Ford through Ferguson team, and the We Power team. Those convenings also consisted of public charter school leaders, philanthropic leaders, leadership of parent advocacy organizations, and economic development leaders. And intention was really focused at these convenings, and it was really loud that we have to hear and center members of the community, impacted members of the community, so educators, families, students, and center what they say is most important in the ways that we approach this citywide plan. And really, again, and spurred by the consistent leadership of Dr. Adams, really centered on the board call to say, we have to do something. And so just really want to hold in that, Dr. Adams has been a key leader in support of community input every step of the way. And so themes from the 2 convenings that were held that emerged were these 3 convenings, lifted up 3 processes or 3 thoughts very loudly from all who were participating and all who were in the room. 1, that a citywide plan is urgently needed. 2, that students, parents, and educators, again, have to be at the center of the planning process, and that a dynamic design and planning facilitation team will be critical to the success of this equitable, inclusive process. And so here's a bit about who raised their hands for this process and this planning process. St. Louis Public Schools, Confluence Academies, Ed Equity Center, Ford through Ferguson, We Power, the Opportunity Trust, and others all raised their hands to catalyze the launch of a bold and deeply collaborative, equity-centered, citywide design and planning process. Really honing in on process, as of course we know this will be something that is emergent and something that will be continue to be developed along the way as we center most impacted voices. Here's just a bit about who is guiding the process. Once again, Dr. Adams and Dr. Williams with St. Louis Public Schools, Dr. Carter Oliver with Confluence Academies, staff and facilitators from the before mentioned organizations at Equity Center, Ford through Ferguson, and We Power. We've been collaborating and meeting over the last few months, really to think about the foundation that is necessary and needed for this process. Again, want to be very explicit about the fact that these facilitators will not internally create the plan, that they're project management leads that will simply hold the space for community, key stakeholders, and education leaders to co-create this emergent and transformational plan over a year-long community-led participatory process. And so, as I mentioned, we began meeting a few months ago, back in April, and these are some of the ways that our progress has shown up. We've engaged in weekly prep and strategy meetings, convenings, and retreats. We've met with over 670 plus parents, students, elected leaders, and educators who have emphasized the following: thinking about an extreme excitement and timeliness of this process, that this is the appropriate time now more than ever to engage in something like this. We've heard that the readiness and urgency of a community-centered process, especially one that is youth-centric. We've heard the need to coordinate between various groups such as SLSC, the need to shift mental models that we all hold in this space, particularly around, this notion of trying something that, we haven't approached before, right? In this city, we haven't been to this place where we've radically thought something different about what could be in our education system in St. Louis. And so the need to shift our own mental models about how and what it even means to dream in this way. That we need, we've also began this process of building infrastructure for a successful launch, building out the process, thinking about the design team build out, a communication strategy and ways that we develop our budget. And we've operationalized collective impact best practices with a specific adaptation to ensure that we're applying a racial equity lens throughout the process in our work. And so I'll pass it at this point to David to guide us a bit further with purpose, mission, and vision.
Thank you so much, Dr. Love, and thank you all for having us tonight. So building on what Dr. Love just shared, we heard an immense amount from those 70 community members who were engaged across the convenings, the one-on-ones, and ultimately started to synthesize and see these trends in what people were hoping from this process. Again, setting the foundation for the community input of parents, educators, and students to really actually shape the content. But from that, a purpose emerged to build a future where every young person in every St. Louis City neighborhood gets the education they need and deserve. A clear vision that we envision a future where every young person in every St. Louis neighborhood attends a high quality, equitable school that equips them to make our city better. And then a mission specifically around what will happen across these next 12 months, which is to activate the power, imagination, and intelligence of St. Louis's own young people, parents, and educators to actually do the work of designing an equitable education system that can create that vision, that better future for all St. Louis City young people to advance and live thriving lives. So then something that really was so sharp in the calls from community that this board answered when you all really raised the need for a plan, a citywide plan, as well as in those convenings where that the outcomes had to be sharp, right? This is something unprecedented, but that doesn't mean we don't need to be specific about the impact that comes from this. And so it was really organized into these 5 categories that, first of all, we really, again, that focus on parents, youth, and educators need to, at the end of this, have a network of those most impacted people who have built the capacity to lead ongoing efforts and really drive the ongoing impact of the citywide plan. You'll really see a theme that this can't be something that gathers dust on a shelf. It has to be living and implementable. Second, some agreed, shared, concrete transformational solutions for K-12 stakeholders, but also adjacent sectors to sign on to. We've really heard a lot, both from board members as well as those stakeholders, that for our education system to be successful, we have to be thinking about the interconnections with other sectors like development, housing, food systems, et cetera, that all affect and can sometimes constrain what happens within the education system. So we heard that call. Third, the infrastructure needs to be built and in place for the implementation of the citywide plan. I'll talk a little bit more later, but phase 3 is completely dedicated to what does implementation look like. So again, it doesn't just gather dust. 4, that there are agreed upon educational equity indicators that measure the effectiveness and drive the strategy, right? Ultimately, this needs to result in something being different for those parents, youth, and educators. So we want shared commitments around what those indicators for change are. And then 5, clear benchmarks for the wins that we want to achieve together every 3 to 6 months once the design process concludes. So something that we've learned both from the Ferguson Commission process and other successful community participatory processes is that the how sometimes is what really matters for the what, right? The product. The how, if we're community centered, thinking about equity, will create the conditions for us to have a successful product. And so these are a few of those principles and values that are synthesized from that input. That radical collaboration is so necessary and must be led by students, parents, and educators. That we need to enter this with a low ego and high impact, right? Centering what we want to achieve for the region and letting the solutions follow from that. Really having that unflinching pursuit of a different future, of a better future, better futures, and that kind of systemic approach to this for lasting change, right? Thinking about those interconnections, thinking about what is necessary for success of our city, our education system. And then this culture of trying, like Dr. Love mentioned, really leaning into trying bold new things because we know that the very act of trying changes the odds. And then some values, really centering transparency, right? We so far have really only built a foundation. None of the actual plan has been developed yet. And it is really central that as it is being developed and community voices are being engaged, that there's transparency along every step of the process towards the completion of the plan. It's important that we also bring vulnerability and humility so that we can go far together, center people power and agency so that the plan can continue to have life afterwards, that we built the capacity along the way. And then also thinking about accountability with honesty. When we have these bold transformational solutions, what are the accountability infrastructure and metrics that we need to put in so that across the region, we're all committed to better futures for our region's youth. So then this speaks to target audiences for this process. So really at the core, at the center, you'll see those directly impacted St. Louisans. So youth and students, parents and families, educators and administrators, and support staff within schools. Then in the next concentric circle out, institutional education leaders. So these are governmental leaders, school board leaders, superintendent, LEA leaders, those public charter leaders, and then DESE and state government leaders as well. And then in the outermost circle, you'll see these adjacent systems, like I mentioned before, that systemic approach to make sure we're getting at root causes, which I know was part of that call that you all made as a board. And then we had to think about the ways that development and property taxes and these other things affect our education system. So you'll see a number of those adjacent systems there, from housing, healthcare to early childhood, et cetera. So now into a little bit of the process. So in developing this, we both heard from those local leaders on what the process could look like, but also really looked to national examples of what other regions and cities are doing that have had transformational outcomes for their youth, and how we could really embody the best of nationally with the best of our knowledge locally to have a strong process. And so phase one, stretching for most of the rest of this year, beginning in late September, would really be about See the System. I'll go into more depth later, but really briefly, See the System is about building a shared understanding of where we are right now, right? Because we talk about diagnosis determines treatment, right? Our diagnosis of where we are, our shared diagnosis, will help us make sure that we're applying the right treatments when we get to the solution. So we've also heard that healing is needed, right? We know that trauma exists within the current system. So how are we centering that and knowing what needs to happen to move forward? Then phase two, that shared level setting, really lets us then reimagine the system. So by this point, community fellowships, where most impacted community members, those in that center part of that diagram, will be empowered to have facilitation roles and to lead work groups. These work groups will be open to anyone to join and be part of advancing solutions, and will be centered around what we've heard from those parents, educators, and youth are the biggest barriers, are the areas that most need attention from this planning process. And then that'll really set the stage then for phase three, cultivating commitment. So you can see we've dedicated 3 months directly to how does this have life post the planning process, right? What are the alignments, the resources, et cetera, that are needed to move us forward. And so now to go a little bit into each of these phases, I know this is small, but we'll provide the PDF of this to you all, and it'll also be available when shared on a website as well. But phase one is, as I mentioned, really working to build a transformational vision statement, to have a clearly defined problem statement, and also priorities on issue areas that are selected from that community input for this work. And some examples of what that could look like include public experiences that explore our history up to this moment, looking at data for where we are, really diving into partnering with research institutions across the region to analyze whether it's facilities, property taxes, a variety of things that arise from what community members have stated, and then really having community visioning experiences and launching those fellowships. There'll be 2 fellowships for this, Better Futures Fellows, which will center those most impacted communities, and then a Youth Voice Empower Fellowship, which will be exclusively young people, young students that attend public school in the region that will have their capacity built to facilitate some of this process. Again, we're just project managers. We're not the real voice, center, and leadership of this. And so you'll see from the phases that we're centering parents, youth, and educators. That moves into phase 2, reimagining the system. So this is where those work groups stand up around those prioritized areas, where data collection and analysis paired with that community listening and those visions and indicators of quality come together to do some deep analysis of those issue areas, barriers, and drivers of change, to develop some clear and focused problem statements that are specific to those issue areas, and then to really have that co-creation of solutions that are informed by all of that research, the best practice, the community voice, and then clarity around who the accountable bodies are and what resources will be necessary to move forward. And that will really drive the development of an action plan. And then third, to really cultivate that commitment that's needed. Because we really want to make sure this community voice is sought through, is seen through. So here is a diagram that speaks to, just has a visualization of what we've both spoken through so far. It comes from some of the best practices around collective impact and how communities can come together for collective impact. So on the left, you'll see that design support team, which includes project management support, data and research support, communications, facilitation, storytelling, other things that will be needed as infrastructure for the design process, as well as an advisory council, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, or Dr. Love will in a second. But you'll see really chiefly this is about community members, particularly those families, educators, and youth, working with existing partners in the education space to form those working groups that will really define that action planning and the vision and strategy for moving forward. And this is all around this idea of creating a common agenda for change and buy-in for change and shared metrics for what that change looks like. And so here's a little bit of rundown again of some of those core design teams, stakeholder groups. So the advisory council, which will be institutional leaders that provide insight and also help shape the process as it moves forward to make some key decisions. And so that advisory council, we're excited to announce, has confirmed co-chairs with Mayor Tashara Jones, as well as Dr. Kelvin Adams, and also kind of living into that commitment to community voice. Really want to hold a space for a Better Futures Fellow or a Youth Voice Empower Fellow to join on in the later stages of the process as a co-chair of the advisory council. As I mentioned, the design support team includes project management support, technical service providers that might be needed as requests come up for research, data, communications, storytelling, and amplification of voice. The community facilitation team, I've mentioned the Better Futures Fellows, Youth Voice Empower Fellows, and also some professional facilitation support we've seen from past examples can be really supportive. So one example of that is the work that Rebecca Bennett does with Emerging Wisdom. And then, of course, those working groups where that solutions happen. And again, that must be transparent, must be open for membership as well. I'll touch really quickly, especially with this partnership with the City of St. Louis and the Mayor's Office, to allow this process to be successful and to really bring in those connections to other departments as well, is to utilize this tool called the Equity Indicators, which was an investment from the Rockefeller Foundation that the City of St. Louis, along with United Way, UMSL, and Ford through Ferguson created, which really centers around those population level outcomes on racial equity, scores them on a 0 to 100 scale, and really helps us to benchmark change, right? Are the solutions that we're implementing actually resulting in change for the people that are at the center of this? And so we're excited to have that indicators really meshing into this and having great synergy there on those shared metrics for success. And now I'll pass it back to Dr. Love to talk a little bit about the fellowships.
Thanks, David. Okay, so I'll share briefly about the fellowships that we've talked about, really centering those most impacted to lead and guide the conversations around this process. This fellowship is for city students, parents, educators most proximate to educational and equity, particularly folks of color. And so the purpose of this fellowship, of course, is to bring together impacted communities, to build capacity, to be able to see and understand why we situate ourselves around some of the inequities we see, particularly not just in education, you know, in our country, in our region, but of course, centering education for this process, and having the goals of developing a facilitation and systems change skill and capacity of these groups, developing ways that they co-facilitate elements of this design process, and thinking about ways that they're prepared to be leaders and champions and public spokespersons for the work that will be done and the work that will continue. And then experiences, of course, shared there, having a data and systems analysis. This fellowship will support facilitation training, thinking about collective impact, ways that we can have a systems approach in our conversations and the ways that we facilitate conversations, the ways that we approach creating platforms and connections to what we see and feel and articulate that needs to happen towards change. They'll have support in the forms of executive coaching and leadership. And then, of course, they'll do some networking plans that align to this design process and all their phases. David also shared a bit about the Youth Voice and Power Fellowship. We know that when we think about most impacted voices in our education system, we definitely have to center the voices and experiences and the recommendations of our youth. And so this fellowship is one that, of course, will be embedded in the Better Futures process over the next year. But then one that will also post this design process be something that our youth then continue to partner with schools, both in the city and county, and scale the ways we think about partnership, particularly with youth, school administration, school boards, to really co-create change together. And here's a bit about what is next. So there will be an announcement on the 18th about Better Futures, STL, what it is and why we exist. That'll be done, of course, via sharing a website. There'll be email blasts, social posts around how we share the ways that community can engage in this process over the next 12 months. And some of the ways that we'll invite people to be a part of the process is to facilitate conversations with schools, neighborhood associations, and organizations, that folks can share their vision for a reimagined system. We definitely want to encourage the community members that engage to apply to become a part of the facilitation team as a fellow. Definitely inviting sign on for support for any community members that are interested in saying, yes, we want to be a part of supporting this initiative and this work. And we definitely want to grow a Better Futures STL listserv so that it can stand on its own. We have finalized the advisory council with the leadership of Dr. Adams and Mayor Tashara Jones, and are working to finalize either Youth Voice and Power Fellow or a Better Futures Fellow to also lead on that council. And then we're thinking about how we approach a launch event collaboratively in late September, which will begin the implementation of phase 1. And so I want to read in this quote from Dr. Candace Carter Oliver, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Confluence Charter Schools. And Dr. Carter Oliver shared that Better Futures STL is driven by a shared commitment to every student in the city of St. Louis. I'm excited that this partnership will design an equitable public education system to equip every young person in every neighborhood with the resources they need to unlock their full potential. And you'll see a list of supporters, current supporters, and partners to this date. I won't read all of those in, but you'll see that there for your viewing. And of course, again, we'll share this deck and information with you. And so as we close, there's some initial ask of the board, thinking about board representation on the council, definitely inviting feedback and ideas on other advisory council members. And then, of course, always inviting continued meetings and conversation with the design support team to get clarity, continue questions, continue conversation in community around this process. Ahead of closing, I want to invite Dr. Roberts or Dr. Adams, if there are any comments ahead of us closing and opening up for questions.
Dr. Roberts, I think at this time, the board may have some questions. Let me give some context. As has been indicated before, the board made a decision on January 12th that they will call on A, B, and C aldermen to complete a resolution, B, to address tax incremental funding, and C, to development of a citywide plan. I took that charge to start the conversation with parties in the community relative to that plan. I do want to apologize to the board for not keeping them closely aligned with the details of everything, but on August 2nd, I made a commitment that after multiple meetings, that this was a direction that I thought we can go in to support what the board's vision was relative to the citywide plan. I did make the board aware, not necessarily in a very detailed way, that we were meeting and talking about this idea, but not ever providing cogent details like you've heard tonight. So for that, I'll apologize. But I do believe, as has already been indicated, this is an answer to the question that the board asked. And so I think it makes sense for the board, obviously, to lean into asking questions or concerns that they might have. I started this process with a lot of concerns. After having multiple meetings, I felt comfortable that the project management leads could do this work and move it forward in an objective way by listening to the community's voice. We started this process with our Emerging Wisdom over a year ago, as we did this process as well. The foundation covered the cost to do that at that time. And so obviously I know the board has a lot of questions based on conversations I've had, I think with every board member with the exception of 2, and emails at least relative to this. And so I'll allow this to be open up for any kind of questions at this time, Dr. Roberts.
I just want to make a brief introductory statement, and then I'm going to defer to my colleagues to put forth questions, and then I'll have a closing statement. The Board of Education has been charged with lifting the vision and values of this community. We're focused on student achievement, accountability, transparency, and above all, community engagement, just like you've kind of indicated in your presentation. We have a fiduciary duty and a moral imperative to make decisions in the best interest of our young people. Following the difficult decision to close schools in January, This board called for a moratorium on the opening of any new schools until a citywide plan could be developed. And to date, I'd just like to know how many organizations in your Better Futures STL has signed on to that resolution.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do know that that is something that the board put forward, but I do know that that has not been a resolution brought for public signing on to. So I really actually welcome the opportunity to discuss that with you, and especially with the invitation for you to serve on the advisory council, as well as with the leadership of Dr. Adams, for those to be really key conversations that are had for the foundation of this move forward.
Secondly, the superintendent was directed to begin the outreach process, but what has ensued has kind of been a failure to communicate. Hence the reason for this meeting this evening, so that we could hear directly from your organization. And thank you, Dr. Adams, for setting the stage for it. Who exactly is participating in the Better Futures STL? Is it a group of organizations or what?
Yeah, so as we've shared in the presentation, the advisory council will be co-chaired by Mayor Tashara Jones and Dr. Adams, and then project management support will be provided by Ford through Ferguson Educational Equity Center and WePower. But really, the core of this process is not those people that I've just mentioned so far. It's really only the foundation for the actual people that will bring this process to life. It's really not about us. It's about those people who will be part of the working groups, the rest of the advisory council, the partners, the educators, the parents, the youth that will really be shaping this process, and we hope will own it, not us owning it.
And the last point for this segment is, I've heard the inclusion of everybody except this board. Everybody has been identified and listed, and there's been no inclusion of the board. This is an elected board. It's put in place by the citizens of St. Louis, and truly it's been discounted in terms of collaborating in this effort. And so I'm hoping at some point that can be reconciled.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for lifting that, Dr. Roberts. Definitely not an intention to be exclusive of the board. We know as a decision-making body, your voice, your input, the ways in which you hope to work to shape some of the outcomes we want to see, all of us want to see for kids in St. Louis is critical and essential. I will also say, I know that our team has been diligent to reach out. The design management team has been diligent to reach out and invite some one-on-one conversations, as we have with many members of the community. And so the hope is that conversations will continue. We are here tonight to be very transparent about the approach and where we are to date. And definitely, you're right. Like we have to come together in order for this to be a success, 100%.
I'll open it up to my fellow board members.
I thank you for coming in tonight and explaining your efforts and what you've been working on. And I'm really disappointed because when we asked Dr. Adams earlier whether or not a board member could be a part of the discussions from the very beginning, we were told that we could not. And so there goes the transparency and the honesty. And I was really feeling some kind of way. But to put this in perspective, because there is a lot of history behind the reason why St. Louis Public Schools are the way that they are, because we had a Team 4 plan that's been a 40-year plan to deny North St. Louis and people of color an opportunity to have an equitable education. So I just want to make that clear. And I just want to make it clear that with being an elected person, I take it very seriously. I haven't stayed here 15 years with no pay for no reason. And my first thing is St. Louis Public School students have been in line a long time to get the resources that they deserve, and they have not gotten them the way that they should. And when the money comes, then there's another organization. I'm just kind of disappointed because there's another organization. And with the onslaught of all these charter schools have sucked the very life out of St. Louis Public School, $18 million. So I cannot sit here and really say that I'm going to be supportive of this effort at all. My first priority is going to be St. Louis Public School students all the way and no other. And I appreciate parents that have a choice and want to do something else, and that's their choice. But the first choice for me is going to be our school district. And I invited people a long time ago when we were talking about school closures to join our effort to help us, not to go off and create a whole nother effort to do something else. So, and with you all having this new whatever it's internship or some kind of advisory board, I understand you guys are paying people money. So I hope that's not true, that you're going to be paying people money versus putting their money into other efforts that can help students. But anyway, I just want to say that I'm really disappointed because your leaders, and I'm not talking about you, but other leaders that have been board members as well, know exactly what's going on. And we need real help. We don't need for organizations to come in and take our leadership away and say that they're representing them and start something new altogether.
I so appreciate so many of the things that you've named about how development and things like the Team 4 plan and other policies around property taxes and others have shaped the reality that are for our schools. And we know that that passion exists across this board, and we so respect your role as fiduciary and governing role over this largest public school that's serving 20,000 students. And that's the exact kind of fire and passion and truth telling that we think needs to be at the center of this process. And that's really what so much of Phase 1 is about. And we're learning from efforts like the Ferguson Commission. Part of the reason when hearing this call and doing kind of the work to explore what this could look like is exactly like you said, this has to be citywide, right? It can't just be on SOPS blaming for things that are outside of the control, ways that other systems should be supporting our public school. And so that is where some of the design around this being citywide is, because actually it empowers the board to have that power and control over and to really raise your voice at the table with these other leaders. Because we know, to your point, there hasn't been, we did some research on the history, a chance to have these kind of public, transparent conversations with the system leaders who are speaking to this history. So that's what we hope can come from this. And we really aim to be as transparent as we could be. I know it was shared in board meeting, as well as with the Youth and Family Matters Committee of the Board of Aldermen. And we really sought not to hide anything, but to really be transparent about it. So thank you.
Right. And I'm really against the way that the moratorium has gone on. We didn't get the support that we asked for. I understand that there were only two Alder people that supported our moratorium. And there was Jesse Todd and Sharon Tyus. And the rest of them that said that they care about St. Louis Public School did not step forward. So I want to know what's really going on here, because this is really important. We're at the verge of change, and our students are looking toward us. Our staff is looking for us to make things better. And it's really getting old to have so many people come in and want to step in front of St. Louis Public School students. I understand what you're saying, but like I said, that $17 or $18 million that the charter school has taken from St. Louis Public School only hurts us and the other schools as well. So with the NGA and other entities coming into St. Louis, we're going to have private communities, gated communities, and our kids are going to be left behind if we don't make sure that they're okay. And so, and resegregation of schools. So I just want things to change and be better for our students, St. Louis Public School students.
I want to say something. And, you know, anyone who knows me knows that transparency is number one for me, and keeping it real is one thing for me. Like, I hear you 1,000,000%. I'm a product of St. Louis Public Schools. I ride hard for St. Louis Public Schools, and I want to see the success of this city. And I heard what you said about, this wasn't verbatim what you said, but you were speaking to like systemic issues, systemic processes that have led to some of what we see as far as disparate outcomes, as far as resources being taken from St. Louis Public Schools. And like, I'm trying to contain myself because I feel and hear the passion there. And just want to really, really, really be explicit about the fact that 100%, have there been missteps? Yes. 100% will there continue to be missteps. That's a part of an emergent process where you have many, many stakeholders at the table trying, this culture of trying that is necessary for us to do just that. Center our kids and make sure that they're okay, just like you said. I hear you. Also, I want to address the notion of paying, and I just want to make sure that we're clear there, paying for advisory members, and just want to be clear that we're not. What we are offering, though, for fellows is stipends. We want to make sure that any fellows, both youth and adult, are paid and compensated for their time. And this is not, an absorbent amount of money, but whether it be gift cards or ways that we can offer some small token to show appreciation for their time, their work, and their effort is where you may have seen a budget line for payments to fellows. So thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
So yes, thank you for coming here today and presenting before us. So I think that what I hear a little bit, so I want to say that I think the first step to moving forward needs to be the moratorium. Needs to be like, if SLPS is going to be at the table, and I think if we're trying to have an equitable education system, we need to acknowledge that the largest public entity at the table is at risk because we're pulling from the same source of funding, but not with the same accountability. And charter schools just don't have the same accountability that we do. And so I think that the moratorium needs to be the first step if there's going to be like any further conversation around this going on. I'm glad you guys have heard of it. I think we've done a lot to like raise the voice and raise the awareness, and I just think that needs to be step one, and especially from all of the entities at the table, honestly, if there's a genuine goodwill to want to create a citywide plan. Because while I understand that a citywide plan means that obviously it cannot just be SLPS, I think that the commitment does have to be in centering SLPS and in protecting SLPS. And like Donna said, SLPS first. And I think that has to be, I think even in your presentation, I get a little bit of a feel like, I don't almost, like all lives matter, you know what I mean? Like just a little bit of neutrality, a little bit. And like, we just have to acknowledge what's most at risk here and who's most vulnerable and start there. And I think that's what equity looks like. And I think that's what we're getting at. And so I think that needs to be centered a little bit more in the conversation.
Thank you. I have a few questions. You mentioned a budget line, Ms. Love. Is there a budget document to be provided to us?
Yes, I mentioned in the presentation, there is one such slide that speaks to the budget. In transparency, the budget is not complete because again, we're in this emergent phase of building out the foundation for this process. But absolutely, that's something that can be shared with you for sure.
And who will be funding this project?
You want to speak to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, there are some commitments from outside funders such as Robley Foundation that
I'm sorry, who?
The Robley Foundation. It's a excellent local private foundation here that funds quite a bit of SPS and other education work. But that's helping to support some of our time. But outside of that, I'm trying to be really clear that we have, in that spirit of transparency, have not shaped those things. There aren't those commitments from a wide variety of funders. We've had conversations with Dr. Adams about what ways that existing supports that the district has, for example, existing commitments to do some deep data and research work that supports the district, but there are no other commitments.
How much has the Rob Lee Foundation provided so far?
$15,000 grant to Ford through Ferguson for our work.
And was that specifically for this effort?
For our general Youth of the Center work, but not specifically for this effort.
And so do you intend on doing fundraising around this effort?
Not outside of what is led by the advisory council.
Could you explain that? I don't understand what that means.
As we've spoken to so far, we're really just building the foundation, and the seating of the advisory council will really act as that kind of decision-making body for the effort. And so it would be really within their power to make some of those decisions. So it's not.
But you had some rather grandiose plans for marketing and communication. That's going to cost money, correct?
Yeah, and we have some internal capacities, like I can just speak for our organization. We have a communications director that is supporting some of the efforts. We Power has communications leads that are supporting some of the efforts at Current. So we're using, as the design team and design support team, using our own internal capacities to build this effort to this point.
And there was already an external PR firm from New York that sent out a press release that's embargoed till 7:30 tonight. Who organized that and who paid for that?
We all have been a part of those conversations, and that is a part of We Power's budget.
So did We Power organize that embargoed press release for this evening?
No,
That was an effort by the three of you?
by all of us.
Okay. And when was that decision made to send out an embargoed press release to announce this project immediately after this meeting?
Can you ask the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just curious
Today, that was made today.
today. And who made that decision?
It was a collective decision made by myself and the three parties.
Okay. So regardless of what this board decides, this effort is going forward, whether or not we decide to participate in it or not. Is that correct?
Embargo, if the board makes a different decision, we are looking to tweak anything that the board says.
Okay, but an embargoed press release is a press release that's already been issued. It just hasn't been given permission for the media until 7:30.
I don't know about the time. It's my understanding it's after this meeting, but it's my understanding that the media is aware of the meeting tonight and is willing to look at any kind of tweaks that we make prior to releasing anything.
Okay, well, that's not my understanding of how an embargoed press release works. So you don't have any plans or understanding or had conversations yet about fundraising around this initiative, about who will be paying for this or how much money that you need?
No, we actually have not made any definite asks about that. We've had conversations amongst those four parties that Dr. Adams mentioned about how the SLPS could provide in-kind support and perhaps some other support, about perhaps how the city of St. Louis could offer some support for this initiative, but no, we have not made any asks.
You mentioned that you've already had conversations individually with 70 community members. Do you have a list of those community members?
We do.
Could you provide that to us?
Absolutely.
Sure.
And Mr. Dwight, you did mention that board members were included in those conversations. Were those board members school district board members, or were you talking about a different board? I was confused.
We have had a number of conversations, one-on-ones or small groups that have included, for example, Dr. Roberts and others. And it also spoke to, as Dr. Love mentioned, that as part of that round of one-on-ones, we did reach out to this board as well as others to include in those conversations.
So I got an email, I think on Friday. I don't know if anybody's reached out to me before that. They have? Who was that?
A member of this support team reached out.
To me and to all 7 board members?
I can't speak on something to confirm it, but.
That's our understanding, yes.
Okay, well, it's not my understanding. And I think I would know if someone reached out to me about this initiative, but it didn't happen. I want to ask you, Mr. Dwight, because you both started and said that this initiative began regarding the school closings. In December, Ford Lou Ferguson issued a statement. I would call it a condemnation of SLPS, this board, as well as Dr. Adams. In that, you said that Dr. Adams was telling half-truths. You also said that it is clear that the SLPS consolidation plan did not withstand scrutiny through a racial equity lens. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ford Lou Ferguson as an organization is an inheritor of the working community led processes of the Ferguson Commission, which was created after the killing of Michael Brown Jr. to look, take an unflinching look at the ways that racial inequity exists across our systems. The commission found that inequity exists in every institution across the region and heard that from those 3,000 community members, researchers, and data experts. So it's part of our mission to continue to look at the data and to call those things out. But for us, when we think about what accountability means, it's pressure and partnership. It's taking a real look at the data and sharing our opinions, but also forming strong partnerships with those institutions because we know that they will also be at the center of the solution. So that's where we're really excited to have been working with Dr. Adams.
Okay, but please, could you, I want to learn if this board has made mistakes. I wasn't on the board at the time. But if we failed to take racial equity into account when we did the consolidation plan and you have specific criticisms of that, could you share that with us?
I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that, but I also want to make sure that we're centered around this process and the opportunities there. So part of the systems change approach is to take a look across time and to see any trends that might exist. And so it was looking at some trends that existed with the schools that were particularly closed through a racial equity lens.
Again, I mean, do you have any details about how that was not a racial equity lens? Because I believe that was very much part of the process.
Mr. Davis, in that same article that you quoted, there was actually some tables of data that had an analysis on that.
So do you understand the factors that went into the school closing decisions? Mr. Dwight?
I really don't think that this is specifically about my opinions. I'd love to take any questions that you have about this process.
Well, you released a statement. I mean, part of what I'm concerned about is that you're asking us to partner with you, or actually you're not asking us to partner with you. It seems like you've already told us that we are partnering with you. But it's very concerning to me that our partners are acting in good faith. Part of your criticism back in December was that the board did not take into account community feedback. And yet the board did engage one of your board members who runs Emerging Wisdoms to produce the exact same kind of things that you're asking to do with this. In addition, the consolidation plan, the school closings, the factors were heavily weighted into the number of students in attendance and the condition of the building. And are you aware of, because of those cost savings of the consolidation, the additional services that we've been able to provide and will be providing starting on Monday for our students?
I am familiar and did familiarize myself with those plans that went into it. Again, for us, partnership is not just about the people that will say the rosiest things to you. It's about someone that really wants you to be the best that you can be. And so
listen, I'm asking for your criticism. I'm asking you to explain it to me. I mean, you give us a lot of buzzwords, you give us concentric circles. I need to know specifics. I mean, our kids needed additional social workers. Our kids needed additional literacy programs. Our kids needed a lot of other wraparound services. Those were things that we were able to provide starting this year because of that consolidation plan. Is that not racial equity in your mind? Is it just about real estate?
Again, I'm really not here to engage in a debate about the consolidation particular plan. This is a broader effort that I would love for us to engage with.
You mentioned in your slides a couple of times the involvement of the Opportunity Trust. Are they involved in this process?
They've, you know, as we talked about, when we invited folks who raised their hand, who showed concern, who have been at the table to have conversations around education in St. Louis, and anyone who was on that list for Dr. Adams was invited. And yes, the Opportunity Trust is one of those organizations.
Since you both are interested in racial equity, educational justice in the city of St. Louis, did you follow along with the legislative session out of Missouri and the educational initiatives this year?
Yes.
Were you aware of the Opportunity Trust and their lobbying efforts to take money away from St. Louis public schools and distribute it to charter schools? Were you aware of that?
I'm aware of their lobbying efforts, yes.
Okay. Were you aware that if they succeeded, they would cost this district $17 million a year? Are you aware of that?
Not aware of the specifics on that, no.
Do you understand what $17 million would do to the students that we serve and the amount of services that we would have to cut back on if we lost $17 million without a replacement?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure the impact there would be detrimental, for sure.
So it's our expectation that the Opportunity Trust and their lobbyists will be back in Jefferson City lobbying for the same efforts that are going to hurt the students that we serve, almost 90% Black students that we serve, the 5,000 students who under the McKinney-Vento Act are considered students in transition, homeless or housing insecure. We're going to have to cut those services if they succeed. So when it comes to a good faith effort and a good faith conversation, I don't know how we can sit at your table across from the Opportunity Trust while we're also spending time, money, and effort in Jefferson City fighting for racial equity for our students. There's just a cognitive dissonance.
This is Natalie. I don't know if you can hear me, but Tony and I can't hear. We didn't hear the last part of Matt's statement, and we didn't hear anything Dr. Adams said. So if once we get the sound fixed, if we could repeat that. This is Natalie. I don't know if you can hear me, but Tony and I can't hear. We didn't hear the last part of Matt's statement, and we didn't hear anything Dr. Adams said. So once we get the sound fixed, if we could repeat that. This is Natalie. I don't know if you can hear me, but Tony and I can't hear. We didn't hear the last part of Matt's statement, and we didn't hear anything Dr. Adams said. So once we get the sound fixed, if we could repeat that. This is Natalie. I don't know if you can hear me, but Tony and I can't hear. We didn't hear the last part of Matt's statement, and we didn't hear anything Dr. Adams said. So once we get the sound fixed, if we could repeat that.
We're having just a little technical difficulty.
But Tony and I can't hear. We didn't hear the last part of Matt's statement, and we didn't hear anything Dr. Adams said. So once we get the sound fixed, if we could repeat that.
Natalie, are you able to hear us? Tony, can you hear us?
I
Yes,
can hear you, Dr. Roberts.
Do you have questions?
yes.
Okay, go ahead. We can hear you.
I don't necessarily have a question, and for you, for those that don't know, this is Tony Cousins. I want to first thank everybody for what it is that you're trying to do. I continue to hear certain terms: transparency, accountability, and honesty. And basically, at this point, I think we need to do better as a city. We need to do better as organizations, because at the end of the day, we're not doing what we all seem to really be saying we're trying to do, which is really helping and serving these kids. What was presented to us, it was nice. I just think at some point there should have been more representation at the table when this was put out. The ideas and everything that was done, yes, it does need to be done, but you need to have people at the table that really have input, and input that's valuable and needed when it's coming to getting what everyone is trying to get done. I agree. The moratorium, it's kind of like at this point, the district is kind of put in a bad situation, because from what I've seen, even in the 3 months that I've been here, the district has just been the underdog. We've been dogged out, what we're not doing, what we should be doing, what we could be doing, but no one has extended that olive branch truly to say this is what could be done to get things moving. At this point, my statement more than anything is, what do we do now and how do we move forward to ensure that this consolidated plan happens? And how do we move forward to ensure that St. Louis Public Schools Board, because we do hold the fiduciary responsibilities of what's going on with the students and the communities that we're supposed to be representing, where and how do we adequately fit in to make sure that this process is being done accordingly?
Thank you, Tony. Natalie, do you have any questions?
It was really more of a comment. This process began 4 months ago in April, as I understand, and I feel like just finding out a lot of these things Friday, which may have been prompted by an email I sent talking about the commitment to no surprises, which is the board's norm and our expectation of each other to not have last minute items or, surprises, honestly. And a lot of this did come as a surprise. And I'm just wondering where the communication was from our superintendent and our board president to the board members. I appreciate that these organizations have tried to reach out independently to some of the board members for conversations, but that's not necessarily board involvement. We were the ones who had to close schools. We stand to lose the most, and our students stand to lose the most if we don't come up with a comprehensive citywide plan. We should have been inviting people to our table. We should not have been waiting for somebody else to build the table that maybe we're allowed to sit at. I am really disappointed in this process, and I don't know that there's anything that could have been done or that can be done now, but there's a lot that could have been done. There could have been a lot better communication. And now we're stuck in this position where, somebody's going to have a plan, and somebody has the mayor's attention, and somebody has the funding for whatever they want the outcome to be. But as Matt pointed out, we are fighting directly one of the partners of this plan, what they would like to pass in Jefferson City versus what we would like to pass or to keep from passing in Jefferson City. And as Alicia pointed out, the moratorium needs to be a starting point. It's not something that, should happen as part of the citywide plan, but we need to stop opening new schools right now as we come up with a citywide plan. So I guess I'm just really, I feel like I should apologize as a board member. Maybe it was because I wasn't asking enough questions. But I feel like there's not been an open communication, and the board needed to be more involved in this. And we are going to do the best we can with what we have, which is what we've always done. We're a scrappy elected board, and we got back to governance, and we're going to keep it. But I think that this could have gone a lot more smoothly, and it could have been more representative of our students, because we are, as Donna mentioned, elected by the public. We are accountable to them. And when we don't know what's going on, we can't be accountable. When we have no transparency from our administration, our leadership, we can't be transparent to the people that we represent. So whether this moves forward or not, I hope that we can renew that commitment to each other as board members. We're not going to get anywhere unless we can be honest with each other and unless we can be truthful. That's it.
Thank you, Natalie.
Okay. So from my understanding of how this should work and what I'm getting from this conversation, I think that we're a team. We're all a team. And so there's been some miscommunication, and I think some things internally that we need to figure out to be fully transparent as far as communication and keeping up to date with things. And so that said, I don't see, to me, my ask, and fellow board members, I don't know if you guys have this ask too, I don't think that anything is going to be ready to launch or be announced. I understand something was sent out today, right? But transparency comes before the announcement. And I think right now, like what we can hear and in this conversation, this moment, is that this is not a good place to start. If we're building a foundation and we're getting a plan in place, we're not in a good place. So my ask would be that there is a pause. I don't know. I know Matt was saying a press release was announced, but we have not, we need to have some conversations, and we need to figure out some things internally. And then I think even as far as the table and who's setting the table and who's at the table, like, I think there needs to be another conversation there. So my ask is that, like I mentioned earlier, the moratorium obviously has to happen. I think that is a number one kind of, if you're following the Board of Education, you can see we just started a legislation and advocacy committee. That's something that we're in conversation with. That's something that I think you guys can take back and make sure that everyone at that table agrees to. But then my other ask is also that you guys, there needs to, if there was an announcement, make an announcement and say, hey, we're on pause, we're on hold. We need to figure some things out. We need to communicate better. Like, this is not good partnership. This is not good collaboration. And I'm not just putting it on one end either. But if there's gonna be any chance of that, I just think there needs to be a pause. like what Matt was saying earlier about the vibe can look like right now, this is happening anyway. Like, I don't understand how you knew you were coming before us to talk to us today. And then there was like a press release of an announcement of happening. That does set the vibe of like, it doesn't matter what we say. So I think we need to kind of go back to that. And if there's like some genuine intentions to move forward and be in partnership and have a citywide plan, which we all think is necessary, then I think the moratorium and pausing and canceling of whatever announcement so that we can have further conversations about the whole process in its entirety and get a healthier foundation so we can move forward for the kids in our city. That's my ask. And I don't know you all's thoughts on that, but.
Yeah. Ms. Sonia, you said that perfectly. And I'd like to been transparent with my colleagues. During our retreat, I mentioned that it's important for me to hear all voices in the community. And as Dwight indicated, I did get a Zoom link on April the 11th. So I was able to listen to this process. And like you, I had some follow-up questions as well. And one of them was around having a press release when this board had very little information on the design process at all. We did direct the superintendent to participate, but we intended to have some reports around movement, and we didn't get enough of that. And so here we are now, able to listen to one another and hopefully pay attention that this board was left out of the process. Reaching out to the board and not getting a response is not an excuse to continue. Perhaps there needs to be some other energy expended, some team building, some trust building, so that people are comfortable. And that, and tonight has just exemplified the fact that we need to build this relationship going forward. We all want our kids to be successful. That's what this board set in motion. When there were doubters out there, we have challenged this community to support what we're trying to do in a different kind of way. And we're engaging people across the region. All community stakeholders to have a part. We've already demonstrated that with the visioning process. And so are you taking into account the things that have already been done, or are you trying to create something else? Because this visioning document captured all of the voices of the community. Everyone had an opportunity to participate, even you. And so at this point, I'm just going to, based on the presentation and the questions presented by the board, I'm recommending that our board, along with the superintendent, re-engage in a robust conversation on the protocols and processes moving forward. We welcome your excitement and your energy and the fast track that you want to begin, but we would not be fulfilling our obligation to our students, families, and community to sign on to our own ask. We put out a request for the resolution and for a citywide plan, and we're still waiting for partners to come to our table. And so with that, I'm just calling to see where my fellow board members are in what I've just shared with everyone.
Dr. Roberts, I'd just like to say I totally agree with that. I'm waiting to see who's coming to the table that we have asked several times. And I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to stress any of my efforts toward any other entity or any other groups except for SLPS. We are in an emergency situation. And I truly care about our children in our district. And I see when you have a group like the Opportunity Trust and you have outside residents that want to control the narrative of St. Louis Public School, that's troubling to me. And so I think my energy would best be spent focusing in on SLPS at this particular time. And someone did send me an email, and I chose to ignore that email because my efforts, like I said before, is about SLPS, and that is totally it, because my understanding is that we were working to improve this district, and we were asking people to come. I've asked people several times when the school closure conversation was happening. I begged and asked, and we talked about the moratorium and didn't get the kind of response I was waiting. And I was just so surprised. the schools closed, Dr. Adams had meetings. He waited on all the people. He waited on group leaders. He waited on all kind of people to come and offer some services for various schools to help keep the schools open, and it didn't happen. Now you're saying that your group has funding and people are supportive. Well, you say you have support, but where's the support? We asked for support for this organization, for our students that have been in line. I'm a line person. We've been in line a long time waiting, and we needed the help. We've been begging for our students, and I'm just going to say anybody else that's stretching somewhere else can stretch. I'm stretching right here in this line for SLPS, and so no need of sending another email or anything else. This is where I'll be for our students first.
Dr. Roberts, I agree with you. I agree with everything Donna said. I agree with everything that Alicia said. Absolutely. I have faith in this board. 3 of us are brand new, but really this board is still in its infancy. I mean, some of the history that we need to remember is that for 12 years, the state had control of this board. And we've only been back to elected governance for 2 years. And during those first 2 years, we faced not only this consolidation plan, which was begun by the SAB, and they kicked the can down the road to the elected board, who took up that grave responsibility and did it with honor, dignity, and as you would say, radical community engagement during a pandemic. They did it with equity, and they did it with the best intentions to serve as many students as we possibly can in the best way possible. And I think that while it's very difficult, that we've been delivering on those promises. I know that we are working very hard on our governing documents, that we have begun with a retreat. We're doing a book study. We're working with the MSBA. We're working with state board members. We're working with our legislators. We're working with our aldermen. And we've done all that in the 4 months that I've been here. We've been out in the community. We have our meetings twice a month. They're open to the public. They are live streamed. Everything that we do is transparent. There's no closed door meetings. There's no behind the scenes meetings. There's no secret meetings with secret groups. Everything that we do is fulfilling our obligation under the Missouri law and our commitment and the moral imperative that we have as a board member. So I trust you, Dr. Roberts. I trust you to lead us through this process. And I hope that, I know that the community is behind us, and I hope that Better Future St. Louis and all of you will take this into account, take a step back, and work with us.
If there are no more questions at this time, Mr. St. Omar.
Dr. Roberts.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, please.
I really appreciate all of the input that you all have given, and I see the ways that we could have done more to engage this board. But I really want to be clear, we have not engaged the boards of any other schools within the region except for this one, because we understand that centrality, that 2/3 of the kids go to SLPS, and we understand that importance. I came to a lot of this work through the Ferguson Commission, right? Out of a moment of tragedy, a group of people coming together that just weren't elected officials, but were all of the people who had a stake in our future, in the betterment of our Black community, who has for so long been oppressed and held back by systems, by policies, by laws. And so that urgency meant that something had to happen, and that all of us had our place in our different spaces and our different powers to advance that, whether that's as elected officials, but also as healthcare, also as economic development, also as neighborhood associations. And that's really the spirit behind this process, is some of those learnings from the Ferguson Commission of what could move this region forward. So it is with that spirit that so many were engaged around this, because we know, as so many of you have spoken to, it's that citywide aspect of it, right? Those different factors that come together that are the only way that we'll move forward. And it's not to malign any of the efforts of the board. We're so thankful for the ways that you are caring for SLPS students, and these other constituencies are also interested in being at the table and advancing things forward. And we heard this call, the call from Dr. Adams, from others, to create spaces where those different people who all have a stake in the future of our kids could come together. So I'm ready to engage, like you suggested, in some of those ways that we can strengthen this process, make sure that it is truly inclusive. But the thing that we can't compromise on is all of those people who need to be called into accountability and need that seat at the table to move things forward. We want these things, like saying there needs to be moratorium. Yes, well, like let's engage with that as a conversation, but there's so much urgency, as you all know, and as we all see from working with people on the ground every day, that these efforts have to go forward. And so I hope that you all don't take this. This was a difficult conversation, and I'm so thankful for what you all have brought up so that we can strengthen it together. That's not the kind of thing that we shy away from. We want to lean into that because that's the only way that we'll actually have a strong process. So I really implore you, like from the history of things like the Ferguson Commission and other efforts to move forward, because of that culture of trying, that when things got hard and just because there were enemies at the table doesn't mean that we can't do great things together. So I'm ready to, and we're ready to continue to engage with the board on this important work.
And Dr. Roberts, I'd make a motion to adjourn.
I'd like one final statement before I entertain that. We are all at this table anxious to move forward as well, but there's a process and a respect that comes along with that. And that's what we're sharing today. And so grateful that you're here and able to receive it. And so I do accept your motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. St. Omar?
Are we gonna wait on those asks?
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins is online.
Yes.
Ms. Fowler is absent. Ms. Val is online. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
we are adjourned.